Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. This is Antonis Polemitis, and this is session 11 of MOOC 10, Innovation and Cryptocurrency. Before I begin with the questions for this session, I would like to say how pleased I am. Over the last few days, I was able to meet many of you and many of the students of the program last week in Athens. We had a super successful decentralized conference, 122 speakers. Our final registered number of participants was over 1,100. The team at the university, I think, did an amazing job organizing it. And there were 90 students, both MOOC students and MSc students at the conference, which was, I thought, really fabulous and a really wonderful opportunity for us to meet students and students to meet us and students to meet each other, including possibly some of you who are here in this chat. So I couldn't have been more pleased by last week's experience, and I was excited that we all got to meet some of you. And we'll be having other events in 2019. Hopefully over the next few weeks, we will settle down on dates and locations, and we will announce them. And if you didn't have a chance to come this year, or if you did have a chance to come this year, we'd still love to see you next year. So that is the logistic piece. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this chapter. What is the current status of the crypto world? Innovators, early adopters, or early majority? I think this is a good question, and I would split it by usage case. I think in the usage case of holding a cryptocurrency for investment purposes, we are definitely moved to early adopters. And I think that happened in 2017. It happened with the big run-up in the price of Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies. And it happened, I mean, for those who were in the US during that time, you saw it. It had almost wall-to-wall coverage on CNBC and some other financially oriented television channels. And so you definitely got to a state where a lot of regular people were seeing this, hearing about it all the time, and some subset of them, the more risk-oriented, the more early adopter, actually went on from there to buy and sell some cryptocurrency. So I think from the investment usage case, or the store value usage case, or the speculation usage case, whatever you want to call it, we are comfortably in early adopter land now. On other usage cases, decentralized exchanges, proof of existence, uncensorable payments, distributed file storage, applications on Ethereum, we're still very much in the innovator phase. We are still very much in the phase of not that much usage. Even the big, exciting, fancy applications on Ethereum, like CryptoKitties, which was one of the most publicity-getting ones last year. If you look at the average daily users, it's low, and it's very low. And it's still a pretty geeky, pretty technical thing where its main, if you view CryptoKitties as a form of game or as a game, it's obviously a very rudimentary game, a very basic game. It doesn't compare to any type of normal conventional game in terms of quality of gameplay or quality of graphics or any of those things. Where it's interesting is, I think, partially for some people, because it has, for philosophical reasons, right? It has this blockchain infrastructure, and some people are going to think that's wonderful for philosophical reasons. and the speculation piece. So it's like a game with possibly some faster route, or it seemed to have route to actual monetization. And to do any of these things, you had to be somewhat technical, at least. And so you look at the actual usage, you look at what the experience felt like. I think you're right back into the bleeding edge innovators on anything other than buying some token and hoping it goes up in value, or trading tokens and hoping you will do a good job trading and you'll make money buying and selling them. I think that's an early adopter. Everything else is an innovator. Next question. You mentioned that there will be a delay of the vertical curve part of Bitcoin adoption due to the complexity of Bitcoin disrupting more than one field. Doesn't that mean we really should be looking at different S-curves for every field of operation? Could you please elaborate which of these fields are, as that might better help to understand the disruptive potential of Bitcoin altogether? Yeah, I think that's right, actually. And it's a complex technology, and it's a sort of fundamental technology. And I think everyone's still kicking around trying to figure out where exactly it's going to be most useful, right? I think we've cleared the hurdle that it can hold economic value. Sure, it's volatile, of course, but it can hold economic value. We're in the 7th year of it holding economic value. So I think we've passed the part that says Bitcoin's going to zero or Ethereum's going to zero. So I think that usage case is cleared. I think the usage case that you can send transnational payments cleared. And I think on the other usage cases, there's a lot of bouncing around trying to discover what it's going to be best used for. And to some degree, and I'll come to this later, is it going to be a B2C technology, or is it going to be a B2B technology? So this is, I think, a very interesting question when looking at this. And you layer on top of it, what should you be looking at? Are you looking at public cryptocurrencies, money-oriented like Bitcoin? Are you looking at public application platforms like Ethereum? Are you looking at private blockchain projects that are done by big corporations that are very much enterprise IT in nature? Right? Those take a longer time to get moving, a longer time to get up an S-curve, and a longer time before anyone even goes out of trial mode. And then once they go forward, then whatever their niche, they tend to become a bit of a standard. So kind of goes back to my prior question, the prior question, in my view on the prior question, which is, I think anywhere other than investment product and transfer of value transnationally, /uncensorably, I think we are in the area of very bottom of the S-curve, and with great uncertainty. Are there specific applications that are going to take off? Are there are they going to take off on the B to C side? So B2C, for those who don't know, is business to consumer. Facebook is a B2C platform, or a B2B, business to business, where enterprise software selling routers to data centers is a B2B business. And B2B businesses tend to have different style adoption curves than consumer businesses, right? The ones that just simply take off tend to be consumer, or consumer first and then come into business second. You saw this with the iPhone, right? Like, no corporations started off saying, yeah, we want to provide support for Apple's platform for our employees for mobile devices. But once the iPhone became super popular with everyone, then companies were kind of backed into and forced into supporting it, or bring your own device, or we're going to have a flexible environment for mobile telephony for our employees. And yes, you can use your iPhone and it'll work on our platforms too. You don't have to use a BlackBerry. You don't have to use a Windows phone, and so on. So pure B2B takes longer than either B2C or B2C that then goes to B2B. There are hundreds of things that theoretically blockchains could be used for, or public blockchains, and those are two distinct but overlapping areas. And I think it's too early to speculate, other than the ones that are happening now, which are the ones that are going to catch public attention and be able to actually gain adoption. So let me go to the next question. According to a study in March 2018, an estimate of 7% of people across USA, UK, Germany, Brazil, Japan, South Korea, China, and India own some cryptocurrency. After 10 years, this is a slow adoption rate when compared to other innovations. Does this appear to show that the replacement of a currently perceived good system, fiat money and national currency, is going to be a long and hard battle? Well, yes, if defined that way, it's going to be a long and hard battle, which might not even be won. I'm not sure, as we've discussed before, that the best way to think about cryptocurrency is that it's necessarily going to replace sovereign currency, so currency that is the currency of a certain economic zone or a certain nation state. Well, let's break down this figure. I don't know that necessarily this study in front of me, but it is the data, if you broke it out, is probably something like, for example, 0% in India and 40% in South Korea, right? And maybe 5 or 10% in the United States. If you think that, let's say in South Korea, there weren't functioning exchanges or well-functioning exchanges until a couple of years ago, the number is actually quite shocking, right? But you got to 30, 40% in a couple of years. India is a country that is less wired, has weaker internet access, is far poorer, and the Indian government has been pretty strongly against cryptocurrency, right? So they haven't quite gotten all the way to fully banning it, but they're tempted. They want to. You can see that they want to, and they're not exactly sure how to, if they should go all the way. So I think the average is a bit misleading. The average is probably fair for some Western nations, but what we've seen in certain countries, it just took off, right? Like in South Korea, it really just took off, and it took off in 12 months. And it took off for speculation reasons, like everyone. Those during the time that it was growing very rapidly, and so everyone thought that they could make lots of money, and so a lot of people bought it. And so it's interesting. What does that tell us? If you have already a technologically very adept society, a technologically very sophisticated society, then it can actually scale very, very quickly in a similar way to any other consumer technology. If you have a society that is not as developed technologically and the official stance is negative, yeah, I think it's going to go much, much slower. In both cases, you're touching on one of the live wires of belief, which is money. And people have a lot of strong opinions about money, a lot of strong opinions about what money is, a lot of strong opinions of how money should work. And when people start saying it's cryptocurrency, it provokes a lot of resistance and a lot of emotion, not just with the people who are very excited about it, which is understandable, but people who maybe aren't excited about it. And if they spend any time with it, they don't tend to be just kind of neutrally unexcited about it. They tend to be vehemently unexcited about it. And money is one of these central myths of how our society works, right? And it's very sensitive. Everyone, well, without money in a modern society, you don't survive. And much of social order and social value is derived by how money works. And any modern, somewhat capitalist society uses money as the organizing mechanism of the whole society, more or less, right? Money is best thought of at a societal level, not exactly as a financial product. I mean, it's obviously a financial product, right? But it's an information processing system. Right? The standard economic theory of why capitalism did better than communism has to do with information processing power more than anything else. Not that like capitalists are good and communists are bad, or communists are good and capitalists are bad. I mean, I think in any given society you have a similar mix of good and bad people, and well-intentioned and poorly intentioned, and true believers in pushing their country forward, and people who are just trying to get by. I don't think that changes so much. What I think does change and is different, if you think about how money functions in a market economy, it has a coordinating function. If something goes up in price, then, and it looks like you can then make money by making more of this, people make more of it because they see economic opportunity, and the price falls and the supply goes up. And if you see that typewriters, the demand for typewriters is going down dramatically, and nobody wants typewriters anymore, and very few are being sold, and the market size for typewriters is shrinking, it's an excellent signal to thousands and thousands and millions of people of don't go dig up metals from the earth to go fabricate them into typewriters, because no one really wants a typewriter anymore. Whereas in a top-down central planning system that is based on models of 5-year plans and so on, it's trickier, because not because the guys making the plans are dumb, they're probably very bright, but it's impossible to be sitting in an office somewhere and try to correctly coordinate the actions and beliefs and production and consumption of 150 million people in the case of the Soviet Union, across 13 time zones, taking into account that things are going to change, and weather is going to change, and desires are going to change, technology is going to change, and crops will do well or crops will do poorly. It's difficult, right? So money is one of the central information processing systems to coordinate our lives. And I'm giving the classic supply, demand, production, product view, but same thing applies to anything. If you hear that computer scientists get good salaries or engineers get good salaries, your parents might push you more so to become an engineer than to become a musician. And there's nothing wrong with being a musician. There's nothing wrong with being an engineer, and there's nothing right about either one of them. But certainly price signals will push people in a direction that the society needs, right? Subject, of course, their own interests and what they want to do with their life and what have you. But it's, again, one of those major signals. And so when you start, and there's a whole theory about how that should work in a capitalist society. And the theory is you really don't want very high inflation because it kind of gets you away from an efficient allocation of things and gets you chasing all types of unproductive activities, trying to get rid of money out of your hands and pick up instead tangible goods. And you kind of don't want deflation, because if you have deflation, it can lead to people hoarding and not purchasing, and then you have lower production. You end up with lower real goods in the world, potentially. So you don't like that. And so the theory is that you want to manage money in a certain way and keep a certain rate of inflation, and that should be in charge of very well-educated people, central bankers, and those should be under somehow a little bit the control of government, a little bit not the control. Like democratically elected people will appoint them, but they usually have a term where they can't be de-appointed, so they're part of the democratic process, but also somehow isolated from the democratic process, the way the judges are, so they can make these good decisions, and so on and so on and so forth. There's like 50 parts to orthodoxy. And now this thing shows up and says, like, well, I'm going to do things differently, and I'm going to call myself money. And of course, it violates every part of the orthodoxy, right? All of it. And that provokes strong reactions. And those reactions are, in many ways, well meant. Like, no, we've tried this stuff before and it didn't work. And we spend many centuries going down blind bends and it didn't work. And now we think this is the right way to do things, and this is going to take it all wrong, right? Like this is, so it's a much more, and I mean this more on some of this core view of cryptocurrency as a replacement for fiat or as a way to store your wealth than blockchain-based customs clearance, right? Blockchain-based customs clearance is going to work or not work based on the same type of things that other enterprise IT technologies work or not work. Right? You need to be quite a bit cheaper or quite a bit easier to use. And if you're one of those two things, eventually you'll get adopted. And if you're only a little bit of those two things, it probably won't get adopted at all, because you need a pretty big breakthrough on one dimension to push things through to adoption. But that discussion tends to be rational, right? Like nobody gets totally worked up. Nobody gets totally worked up about whether this exact database technology or this other database technology have XYZ performance parameters. I mean, the vendors might yell at each other, but no third party actually gets worked up. Whereas here, where you're talking about the nature of money and some deep orthodoxies about what money is and how it validates people's efforts and how it should be operated, and then you can say, well, no, I have a different way. Well, that provokes almost religious reactions on both sides. And so even if it is what ends up happening in the end, which I don't know, I have some skepticism myself that it's a good replacement for money. I know others believe differently, but I have some skepticism. even if it is that, it's going to take a long time because you're hitting upon core beliefs. And so I'm trying to find, Mark Andreessen had something about this. I think it was in Tim Ferriss's book where he interviewed him. And he says, because it's such a sensitive topic, people will find like one of 30 things wrong and be like, well, this can never work. And this can not move forward, and people get very passionate about it, and you don't see that with normalish technologies. So, and then you go to all the other stuff, right, that it's still quite immature. We had discussed this, I think, in the prior one. I mean, the average person holding any significant amount of wealth in a decentralized manner by themselves, sort of a nightmare today still. It's not that easy to use. It's not the type of thing that's ready for the average person. And so what we might be looking at is something closer to deep infrastructure, and those things take a long time, right? Like, it's very tricky what the right example is to look at here. And someone might argue that if you're on the pro cryptocurrency or pro blockchain team, you're cherry picking and moving the hurdles. So, hey, it's been 10 years. It has this level of adoption. Is that good or bad? Well, relative to Instagram, it's pretty bad, right? Like, Instagram got a lot of adoption pretty quickly. Relative to TCP/IP, I don't know. Not really. I mean, the internet spent at least 2.5 decades in the wilderness, not being used by many people. On the other hand, so like the counter argument to my counter argument is, sure, but now the internet's there, and that provides a platform that you can build on top of very quickly. And if this thing doesn't grow very quickly, it's going to be a left behind technology. Because in the meantime, while cryptocurrency's been messing around, effectively not getting adoption or not getting broad consumer adoption, you look at a country like China, where all types of mobile money and mobile wallets now have hundreds of millions of users, and you can do all types of things, and nobody cares if they're working on a blockchain or working on the traditional payment system, because you can do all types of innovative and nice and new things with payments with them. So, don't know, it's tricky. Now, I'll throw another example for your consideration. 20 years ago, there was lots of discussion and debate of whether Unix/Linux can ever replace Windows. And those discussions tended to go along the lines of, well, if we just make a nice graphic user interface and it'll be sort of like Windows, it's going to be free, and that's going to be exciting to people. And so the computers will be less expensive because you don't have to pay a licensing fee to Microsoft. And it's also going to be open, and you won't have this kind of monopolist or pseudo-monopolist system. And isn't that great? And the counter argument would be, it never quite works right. And then you go install a new graphics card and half your computer breaks down. And so it's never going to be ready for the consumer. And the reality is, Linux never replaced the Windows desktop. But over the course of decades, it did take majority share of servers where it turned out where graphic user interfaces are less important. And arguably, if you look at Android and OS X and what's at the base of them kind of came around on the mobile side too and made an appearance. And so it's interesting because the thing that was supposed to happen, or that there was a debate about how it was going to happen, didn't happen. But Linux turned out to be a big success anyway. And maybe that's what we're seeing, right? Maybe the whole discussion of will people be using whatever X cryptocurrency for payments versus their credit cards or their debit cards or cash? Maybe that's going to be a secondary battle. Maybe that's going to be a battle like, will my normal computer as a normal civilian be a Linux machine or a Windows machine? Turns out that wasn't the interesting battle. Linux went around to areas where the fact that it was free and open and could be tuned in different ways turned out to be more important on the server side and the business side and the enterprise side, and then did super, super well there. And maybe that's what happens. Maybe cryptocurrency and blockchain ends up working less as a B2C technology and more as an infrastructure technology, more as a background technology. And maybe some combination of all these things happen, right? So you could imagine that some subset of cryptocurrency and blockchain ends up to be infrastructural B2B, and certain apps end up taking off as apps. And in certain countries, it ends up taking on other functions. And there's no rule that says all of these things need to happen in a consistent and coherent manner across all the variations across the whole world. And so you already see this in payments, right? Like before the Chinese big service providers took off, arguably the most advanced mobile money system in the world was not in Silicon Valley, but in Kenya through M-Pesa, which is weird, right? Like, I mean, you wouldn't actually think going back in time and predicting that who would use mobile money faster, Americans or Kenyans, that Kenyans would be the answer. Right? On any other topic like this, you say, well, of course it's going to be Americans because Silicon Valley and we're more advanced and we do all these things. It turns out to be that way. And so if you look at retail digital payments or consumer digital payments, the world is split up into different zones where people are doing very different things with very different approaches. And there wasn't one S-curve that everyone went up, or that one technology won, or that one approach won. There were different approaches and different technologies. And that's how it played out. And so I suspect this is a broad enough technology that we will see this type of thing happening, that we will see different outcomes in different locations for different applications of technology. And I think the best way to think about it is think about how much broader a technology and broader a platform is than some of the other things that you see on these S-curves, right? Like Facebook went up the S-curve quickly. Instagram went up the S-curve quickly. TV went up reasonably. BCRs. All of those, it's pretty straightforward what the functionality is, right? Oh, we buy a TV, you turn it on, shows you pictures. There might be different types of pictures, but shows you pictures. And then we went, oh, now we have color TV. Okay, we have color TV. We have microwaves. And what do you do with a microwave? I mean, you can cook different types of food, but it's clear. You can have a 2-minute discussion with almost anyone and get across the main point of a microwave. And you can have maybe a 2 or 4 or 5-minute discussion with someone and get across the point of what Instagram is. Given that I partially do this for a living, you can't do this at all with cryptocurrency and blockchain. right? Like you end up having a whole 12-week course just to get people oriented on some of the basics. And even after the 12-week course, there may be more questions and answers at the end of it. And so that feels like something different than a product that simplistically runs up the S-curve. And it feels like something that will take a long time to play out. Now, this could be just resetting, moving the hurdle. If you imagined, maybe it's just that nobody wants to use it and it will stay a niche product and that's all it's going to be. And no applications go up that curve. I obviously don't believe that. I mean, the basis of our initiative here at the university is that blockchains are going to be a big deal. And personally, I think public blockchains are going to be a big deal. And public blockchains with tokens of value are going to be disruptive technology. But where and how, it's interesting. Again, it all depends what lens you put on it. If you had gone back 5 years ago and told people that Bitcoin would be around and kicking, and it would be $5,500, and that it would have X% adoption globally, and that there would be hundreds of derivatives of it, I think most people would have told you, at least from some aspects, this is the success case. And so now we are at that success case, and people say, well, I mean, gosh, why is it not $25,000? Or why aren't we using it for retail transactions? And why only 7% of the world owns some of this stuff? I don't know. I mean, 2012, 2013, I think this outcome would have been on the far end of positive outcomes, right? When Bitcoin was $300 and everyone's not quite sure if it's legal and everyone's not quite sure if it's just a tulip bubble. If you told people, yeah, it's going to collapse all the way to $5,500 and people will still be using it 5 years from now, and most developed country jurisdictions will say, yeah, it's fine to use it. You just have to follow certain steps on how you use it. People would be pretty excited by that, I think, if you told them that. And then you get there, you're like, well, is there, and there's this reflexive quality of presumably Bitcoin price should have something to do with Bitcoin utility. And then does that mean like utility to do things other than holding it? Because if it's so, then you start working your way and think, oh my God, it's still a big bubble. But if one of the functions that gives it utility is it maintaining a price, because then you can store some value there, then just the fact of it maintaining a price and sticking around is a good sign. It's a little bit Lindy effect. I'll give Andreas the link to post. Right? The Lindy effect says, future, if something's not perishable, like humans do not have Lindy effects. We ultimately all die. But non-perishable topics, the longer they stay around, the longer they might be predicted to stay around beyond that, as opposed to their lifespan constricting the way that a human's might. After you get through childhood as a human, your mortality rate goes up every year. For other things, the more years they stick around, their mortality rate goes down. And as their mortality rate goes down, they'll be perceived as less risky and what have you. I'm pretty sure today Bitcoin is perceived as less risky than it was in 2013. It has certainly moved on the S-curve. and more broadly of cryptocurrencies, and definitely blockchain, right? Like blockchain didn't even exist as a concept then, right? This idea that we're going to take the technology out of the cryptocurrency and use it for other things and don't have to do those scary cryptocurrencies, but we're going to run XYZ platforms in blockchain. That did not really exist as a concept in 2013. So it's a good question. I think about this a reasonable amount. And I think for this complex of technology, it's doing okay, but it's still early. It's still pretty early. All right, next question. Has the massive expansion in ICOs for people to merely grab other people's money cannibalized and diluted the value that the Bitcoin innovation introduced? So this is a concept that comes up a lot because people say, wow, a lot of ICOs were scamming. True, right? A lot of ICOs took a lot of people's money and are probably not going to give it back, or not going to give them back as much money as they took. True. This is going to burn a bunch of people on the topic of cryptocurrencies. And they either will be less likely to invest in the future, or the money that they would have put in the ICO is money that they would have otherwise put into Bitcoin or Ethereum, as one of the serious ones. And just think how much higher the price would be if all these people didn't buy popcorn coin and instead had put their money into Bitcoin. I guess I think where I'd come out on this, other than a lot of the ICOs were terrible. That part's clear. I guess it's hard to get worked up when you have the following situation. And we'll put the Bitcoin hat on for a second, right? Bitcoin shows up and says, hi, I'm Bitcoin. I'm this totally weird new thing. I'm founded by some guy no one's ever heard of. And I would sort of maybe kind of want to replace the US dollar or the euro or these gigantic multi-trillion-dollar money supplies that are backed by nation states that have centuries of work to get there and have these whole societal orthodoxies built around them. And in fact, like, you manage to get out of the gate. You don't just get, you get laughed at the beginning, but actually manage to get out of the gate and take a position. Like Bitcoin got there to at least a certain level. It's already gotten there. And then once you've done that, I think it's a bit, and along the way, you, Bitcoin, right? You're complaining that, well, the politicians are saying nasty things about me, and economists are saying nasty things about me, and academics are saying nasty things about me, and regulations are annoying and irritating, that people are trying to slow me down with regulations, and this whole thing. I mean, people are not being open to this new innovation, and they're being proprietary about their existing system, and it's mean, and it's wrong. And that's I think, perfectly natural and rational position to take. But it's a little much, if you're that thing, to then go around and say, whoa, you're launching you're launching Bitcoin Sapphire? No, that's not good. I've checked. The correct parameters for cryptocurrency are A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And those are the specific parameters that my cryptocurrency is doing, and it's the first, and it's the best, and it's the oldest. And it's super important that, like, this is this one opportunity in time to make a global cryptocurrency, and so I need everyone focused on this project. And you cannot be distracting people's attention and money and reputation to Bitcoin Sapphire. I don't know if there's a Bitcoin Sapphire, but There probably is. And this is in no way a negative view on Bitcoin Sapphire, should a Bitcoin Sapphire exist. But it's hard, I think, to take that position, right? Like, it can't simultaneously be the case that everyone was wrong before you. And by everyone, like everyone, the whole way the whole planet and nation states organize money is wrong. You have this new thing that's very intriguing and weird and different, and that's for sure right. But variations of this new thing are also for sure wrong and are hurting the new thing. I mean, it's a tough position to take. It's a tough position to take, even if you might believe that, right? I mean, I sort of believe this is true. I sort of believe that if everyone just put their money into Bitcoin, Bitcoin price would be higher, and it's almost self-evidently true. But I'm not sure that means much, right? Like, if I was trading a public company stock and I had a public company stock and I was Facebook, and people are saying, oh gosh, it's a real shame that people are also investing in Google, because if they just bought my stock price would be higher. It would be, and you'd have more capital and you'd be able to raise more capital and do more things. But if you're in the world of non-state monopolies, you don't have a monopoly. You don't have a monopoly. It's kind of the whole point of Bitcoin, right? It's not a state-backed, I don't want to say enforced, state-backed monopoly. It's not. And so if you're in the position of non-state-backed monopolies, state-backed non-monopolies, non-state-backed non-monopolies, you can't, I don't think it's fair to complain that you have competitors, right? Like, the competitors, the market will play it out. The scammy stuff will die. People will lose money. People will be unhappy. There'll probably be more regulations come out. It will slow down the adoption of the overall technology. But if Bitcoin or Ethereum or some version of a Bitcoin is right, then it's not going to be not right because someone launched Bitcoin Sapphire or an ICO for popcorn or whatever dumb/scammy idea happened. We saw all of this during the dot-com bubble. Right, everyone got super excited in the late 90s. Many companies with very limited operational success at that point were able to command very high valuations because everyone was very excited that the internet was going to change everything. And they were way ahead of their skis, and most of those companies went to zero. And some of those companies didn't go to zero, but went to like 10%. And some of those companies included companies like Amazon. And then it turned out that, like, certain of those ideas were in fact bad ideas and never happened. And certain were good ideas and had good execution, like Amazon, and ended up being fine in the end. And certain ideas actually turned out were good ideas, but were just early and were reinvented 10 or 15 years later as successful business. A classic example of this is like pets.com. Everyone used to use that as the cliche example of how dumb the dot-com bubble was, right? Like, how could you believe you could sell pet supplies and pet food online? People were really crazy in 1999 and 2000. Like, this stuff's bulky and low value, and economics are never going to work. It's like the worst things on, like, books are okay, but bags of dog food, that's really dumb. How could people be so dumb? And after that collapsed, it was a dead category for quite some time. And then 10, 15 years later, selling pet products and food online turns out to be a perfectly valuable and viable business. And what changed in the meantime was, instead of having probably 20 million or 10 million potential customers in the United States, you ended up having 100 million or 150 million. And the cost of running everything online dropped dramatically, and the distribution networks to deliver things got much better, delivering things directly to consumers. And all of a sudden, a bunch of things that maybe not one of them was enough to swing the gap, but multiplied across 50 of them, multiplied them across 50 of them would be a big problem, or would make a big difference. And suddenly selling pet gear and food and products online turns out to be a good idea again, or for the first time. So I don't worry about this stuff so much. It seems to me that if cryptocurrency or blockchains are what they think, if what we think they could be, the optimists, they won't be derailed. They might be delayed. They might not go everywhere at all times. They'll probably take longer than we think. But if there is something valuable in being able to organize people in a permissionless manner, in an uncensorable manner, and globally, digitally around the world, which I think there is, we'll figure out the model. We'll figure out the usage cases. Eventually, it will start delivering real value to larger and larger numbers of people. And it will get to its natural end place. And I feel extra confident about that because at least Bitcoin and I think Ethereum at this point are probably decentralized enough that they're probably indestructible. Don't quote me on that, right? Don't jinx me, but probably. And so if one of them was a specific company, you could say, wow, if this company was lost, we might get pushed back a decade or might get pushed back 15 years. I don't think it's like that. Right? Like, I'll tell you what this isn't. Like, if Steve Jobs didn't exist, the pathway of mobile phones, I think we would eventually ended up with keyboardless phones, but probably they'd look a little different and they'd take longer to get there. There's no such equivalent in cryptocurrency. There's no like one person, if they were gone, this is all going to fall apart, or one company that if it goes bankrupt is all going to fall apart or get super delayed. I think it's something that will find its time and will find its niche and or its market, which may or may not be a niche. And we'll see when that happens. So you're going to say, well, this is maybe an unsatisfying answer, but I mean, if you can predict technology, technology S-curves are a useful framework to try and think through things. But as all prediction, forecasting, investing frameworks, they're hard. They're super hard. Right? Like what the right price of a company in a finance textbook can be figured out with great precision, but it doesn't mean it's actually easy to make money in the stock market. But if you don't even have that finance background in the first place, then it's impossible to think coherently about stock prices and stock valuations. And this is like that. If you have the frameworks relating to innovation, it helps. It's a good starting point. And then you have to look at it and think about it and get experience, because it's very, very difficult. There are only, probably a few dozen very good venture capitalists in the world whose ability to understand which technologies, which are not just the right technology, but the right time. And what that means is you want to pick up the technology right before it's heading up the S-curve, because that's where the real rewards are and the value is. It's a very hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do, even if you know the theory, even if you know the technology, even if you know the frameworks. It's hard. And so if the answer was obvious, it would have already happened. And so you're going to have this effect where you kind of know that you're going to go west, but you don't know exactly if you go west, are we going to end up, I guess I'm in Cyprus, we're going to end up in Italy or Portugal or somewhere else. Andreas is saying I'm having a problem with my connection. It's okay, I was on my final remarks anyway, so I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me now? I'm waiting to see what Andreas tells me. Okay, well, I was on my final remarks. I think I won't repeat myself again, but I think it is a very interesting space, a very difficult space to predict, and one that is going to go in quite a few different directions across country, application, and type of technology. So I think that's what we have for today. I think we're at the end of our time. Thank you all, as always, for joining, and we'll see you soon for session 12. Thank you very much.